Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on a new episode of Quickfire. We are here on a victorious Wednesday evening as Chicago Fire Football Club have vanquished the invaders from Detroit City. Not the city of Detroit. Detroit City FC came to town tonight and
Of
lost at
Hamtramck,
the
Michigan.
hands. What was it?
Of Hamtramck, Michigan. Yeah.
Yeah, of Hamtramck, Michigan. As Chicago Fire emerged victorious in what was their first win in the greater Chicago metro area of 2025. I'm joined today by the best in the business. I've got Tim here joining us from the West Coast. Tim, how are we feeling?
Yeah, that was a necessary win, which I think, Fire fans have been waiting long enough to see from this team in person.
I think the Fire have been waiting long enough to see it in person too, to be candid. And Alan is with us as well. Alan, how are you feeling, sir?
Should have been 7, but the offside rule exists for some reason.
Yeah, and for some reason, the one guy that showed up to play from Detroit was their goalkeeper. But hey, can't have everything, right?
Nope.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. For the amount of chirping he got, the guy stood on his head tonight. You gotta give him a lot of respect for that. And we'll start with what was a pretty dominant performance from the Fire attack. Something I think all of us have been waiting to see. Fire maintained possession for a majority of the evening, kicked off the scoring with a Hugo Kuiper's goal. Detroit City added one of their own for good measure and put one in the back of the net on behalf of the home team. Marin Haile Selassie and Omari Glasgow added goals in the second half to cap off what was a 4-0 win for Chicago Fire. Chris Brady adding some wonderful defensive efforts as well. Tim, I'll toss to you. We have a few kind of things we'll touch on, but I'll toss to you. If you had one big takeaway from the game, where did you fall?
Yeah, I mean, this was a game that Greg Berhalter before the match said it wasn't going to be about tactics. It was going to be about matching the intensity of Detroit. And it's kind of funny that it seemed like it was very much the Fire's tactics, which we can talk about for a minute. I don't think there's a lot to learn from it, but I think that it was a textbook version of what their tactics were supposed to look like. And they matched the intensity of Detroit. They exceeded Detroit's intensity through, I think, a long part of the match. And that's something that the team hasn't consistently done throughout 2025, and it's good to see. I mean, lower division opponent, all that, but like the intensity is still the intensity, and they had it when they needed it this time, and that has not consistently been the case in 2025.
Alan. Yeah, Alan. If you had one big thing, where do you fall?
I mean, first of all, it was bumping in the supporter section because of how the team was dominant. The team everyone was having fun. Honestly, it was, again, I mean, of course, not to say that the other games haven't been fun in the supporter section, but especially, at the full-time whistle, John, you were like, can we get a na goodbye? And I needed a second to remember how it goes. And I played it out and then I started and then next thing we know, we got the whole supporter section singing na hey goodbye, and it even made it to the Fire social media. So shout out John for that. But yeah, no, kind of like what Tim said, it was an incredible dominant performance. There really wasn't too many moments that had me ripping my hairs out in terms of Detroit City chances. If anything, the only thing I was ripping my hairs out was Tom Barlow, because oh my days, the fact that he missed the sitter and then he scores, but it was actually offside. Come on, yeah.
I want to defend Tom Barlow for a second because I don't think he was offside on the goal. I think Marin was offside. And Tim, please correct me if I'm wrong. You were the only one watching from a broadcast angle.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great broadcast angle, to be honest, but yeah, it was, because they don't use the camera set up in SeatGeek for the U.S. Open Cup matches for I think reasons. Instead, they kind of broadcast that they set the cameras up where basically Tyler Terrans and Tony Miola were for the matches that were, well, any away matches, but also the games that were at SeatGeek during their time in charge. So yeah, but it did look like it was not him that was offside. Either way, the team was up. He got one in the back of the net. He can take confidence in that. It wasn't like the offside was so clear that it created a tremendous advantage. It was still offside. And talk about nitpicky when it's a 4-0 win, when
it was
Detroit
almost a
didn't
mercy
manage a
call.
single shot in the first half. So, um,
Yeah. Well, and I
and I think
think,
that that says something good.
oh yeah, no, I think that's like a perfect, first I think thing we really have to touch on, right? I think after that second goal went in the net, there was a big just like, dear Lord, we needed that. And by we, I mean the club needed that, the team needed that, the players, Greg, they needed that. And I think the supporters, everybody who watches the team needed to see that type of victory, right, Tim? You talked about how dominant it was. Alan, you spoke on it as well. Really a start to finish controlling of a game you should control. And I do want to give credit to Detroit City. They brought the effort, they brought the intensity. That was not a game of they showed up and felt like they were going to lose. You could tell early they thought they might have had a chance at least for 5 minutes or so. But so they did bring that intensity, and the Fire, to their credit, matched it, which is not something they've done. So not only the win, not only the numbers on the board, but the effort, the intensity, the way they won. I thought that was huge.
Yeah, and like I don't again, we don't want to take too much from the fact that it was a win, just because so far out of the round of 32, it was 16 matchups between lower division teams, mostly USL Championship, at least one USL one side. I'm struggling to think if there's more right now. And as we're recording, there's still two games ongoing. Um, the MLS team is leading in one of those two games in San Jose over Sacramento, and Phoenix and Houston are tied. But in the 14 that are decided, it's been MLS teams advancing in every single one. Some more comfortably than others. Some were close. I mean, the Philadelphia Union, who have been flying this season in MLS, needed penalty kicks to advance over Indy 11, who the Fire 2 had a pretty good outing against last year. So, like, but overall, I think it just goes to show talent gap between the first and second divisions in this country. I mean, Hugo Kuipers makes more money than I think Detroit's entire roster has made over the past 3 years, right? Like
Jonathan
he
Bamba
makes that
might.
much in 1 year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you talk about the talent gap there, Tim. I think, and I think, I want to say you're absolutely right. It's not about the win, it's about the performance. It's about being dominant start to finish. It's about giving, candidly, Jonathan Bamba a chance to find his feet a little more and look a little stronger after a short and not great performance last week. It's giving Jay Davila 90 minutes to go out there and kind of get his feet underneath him, even playing against a lower level side. And we've talked a little bit about, hey, wouldn't it be great to just give him some run with Fire 2 and just get his feet under him in a new country? And I hope that this will go a long way in terms of doing so. Um, the one that
Yep.
really, really stood out to me was Amar Glasgow. I mean, obviously, we saw the goal, which was obviously just awesome, right? We all love Omari as a player, as a person, wonderful guy. But even more so, I was super impressed by his physicality, his grit, the way he played the game. I've talked a lot about how I don't think he's there yet, but going up against a championship side, he has the talent to compete there. Keeping that physicality up, I think, was impressive. Alan, I don't know where you kind of fell in that boat.
I mean, Amari Glasgow is my personal match. I mean, it just explode. I mean, this is something that we noticed when he was with Fire 2 for the most part, just how explosive he can be and physical, as you mentioned. And we definitely saw that today against Detroit. And just in addition with that goal, it's a little cherry on top of the malt for him today. But like you mentioned, he still needs a bit more time to cook, but I definitely think he will get there.
I think that it's kind of funny that you guys both mentioned the guy who had a goal and I think a strong performance, and just I'll get on Omar Glasgow's performance in a second. But I mean, Martin highlights the last they had a goal and 2 assists on the evening, and he has not looked
100%.
good in 2025, and he's had limited minutes, and I don't know. It's a correlation causality thing with Greg Berhalter. Is it that he's having trouble adapting to the system? Is it that he's not feeling 100% there? Is it just that he's not getting enough sleep to be a top level pro athlete with a newborn child in his home? Um, it could be any combination of those things, but he looked tremendous, and he showed, I think, with the way that he played, not just the strong play that we saw from him, and 2 assists and a goal, a second goal that was called off on offside as well, but also leadership with the way he was acting around the squad and setting other people up and being selfless and being there and getting back. And I think that was a really good performance to see from him. And I think before the match, Berhalter said that the starts were going to be from regular starters that we'll see week in, week out. Guys like, I mean, Hugo Kuiper's like, how often do you see a DP striker starting in a round of 32 MLS for an MLS team in the round of 32? But it's it's guys that are quote on the cusp of the starting 11 that hadn't quite broken through that we're seeing. And like he called out Marin first, and he looked really good in this game. And it's one game, but hopefully this becomes a catalyst for the minutes that he gets in MLS and makes an argument for more minutes, which is what you want, because I think we've seen the midfield performances get stronger, because if someone doesn't have a good performance there at any level for any reason, there are so many players in those positions that can play that they're out the next game and it's somebody else's chance. And then it's theirs until they lose it, basically. And I think that that's
One
really healthy.
100%. I think
Healthy
Martin to this
competition.
point, I think has been a victim of obviously the injury right early in preseason really held him back. He wasn't able to participate as strongly. He's also been like let's be honest, right? In terms of the incomings this year, Philip Zinkernagel has been maybe the best, right?
Yeah,
I feel pretty comfortable saying that, and so he's been a little bit a victim of that. But Tim, to your point, I love the idea of can Marin push Jonathan Bamba for that spot? Like I don't think he is such a big acquisition that he is going to be guaranteed starting game in game out. We know what he can be at his best, but he hasn't quite been there. And I'll be candid. I think at towards the end of last year, I felt Marin was a guy who could be a very high level MLS player. I still believe he has that in him. And if this game is an indication that he still has that and that he can reach those levels in the Berhalter system, it's huge. Now you have a third very viable winger. It gives you the opportunity to maybe spend that DP spot elsewhere, because there has been some talk about, do you bring in another DP forward? If Marin can be the Marin we thought he was going to be when we picked up that purchase option, it completely changes the calculus on that. And now you maybe have another resource to spend elsewhere.
exactly. And like, similar Omar Glasgow, going back to his performance, I mean,
Oh
it
man.
it isn't the role that he was brought in to play, right? Like we would have thought maybe at the beginning of the season, if you told me this is going to be the lineup in this, to start a game against the USL Championship side in the Open Cup, I would have thought, all right, so like, just like the starting attack, right? I would have thought, okay, so it's going to be Marin starting, and then Omar is going to spell him in like the maybe plan second half sub, so they both get minutes or something. But that's not what we saw. What we saw was both play the distance, and both I think looked really good. And it's Omari learning a new role. And talking about the physicality, I mean, the USL Championship isn't like EFL Championship level physicality,
Yeah.
because that there are
Yeah.
probably like assaults that have had less violence than that league has seen. Um, but um, but like USL Championship is a physical league, and it's a league where being big and strong is an asset, I think, as much as skill, sometimes more than. And Detroit's not a bad team in that respect. Omari was fighting out of his weight class, to say it mildly, with his performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you saw, Alan, you mentioned like, oh, how explosive he is. That's what we saw from him in Fire 2. I think you saw a little bit more of that. He was very not dangerous, right, because it was in a defensive setting, but he was very aggressive in the air. He was not afraid to go up. He was not afraid to draw contact. He was not afraid to draw a whistle. We can talk about his like one-on-one ball skills, and I think they've surprised me. I've been impressed, to be candid. Like if it told me purely defensively, I'd probably take him over Andrew Gutman right now, with all due respect to Andrew Gutman. Um, but I was super impressed by his ability to win possession back through kind of that ability to draw contact, right? Um, yeah, and so I think it was a really great sign from him, and it bodes really well in terms of. I had this thought after last week's game, as disappointing as it was. Like you look at that starting 11, and you think Sergio Orahel's 19, Amari Glasgow is 19, Brian Gutierrez is 20, Chris Brady is 21, excuse me, and we don't expect all of these guys to be here for 5 years. But do we think we can get 3 more years out of Sergio Orhel and Amar Glasgow, and maybe one or two more of these guys, maybe a Jay Davia. I don't know, but that's how you create sustainable success in MLS, right? Is you have this core of young players who you can keep over an extended period of time, and then supplement with that bit of roster churn that you're always going to have, because that's just the nature of the sport.
MLS, right? Yeah, um, yeah, and I think that's a good way of putting it. And like again, it's refreshing to see those performances from those people. Um, before I hit out, like again, I don't want to overweight this game. Like it was what it was, and um, but do you want to talk a little bit about people that we thought maybe didn't impress as much before we head out?
You know, I I got it. So, I always try to caveat this, especially, typically for the normal post games, we always try to rewatch, especially when it was a home game, so we can make sure we're talking handedly. Obviously, for the quick fire, we don't get that opportunity. So I'll speak a little bit from haven't not having the chance to rewatch yet. Um, I d- I'm kind of sad to say this. Like I wasn't overly impressed with Kellen Acosta.
Yeah,
He kind of was invisible. Like I don't. He had a couple decent plays. It's, it was a little disappointing in that sense. Nobody else really jumped out to me. I mean, they were picking on Andrew Gutman earlier in the game defensively, which was not surprising, but a little surprising.
What's so funny is you mentioned Kellen Acosta. I, in him being invisible, I didn't even notice that he was playing. I'm not lying. Like you mentioned Kellen Acosta that was playing, and I was like, wait, he played? Like that honestly invisible. Like I didn't even notice that he was playing.
yeah. I mean, he did have appearances, right? Like I think according to data from Opta, which it's still probably updating a little bit, but he had 58 touches, which is not yeah, it's a decent number for a midfielder in a game like this. Only four in the opposition box. Only two passes into the final third. Dispossessed once and 1 for 2 on accurate long balls. So like that's not a great performance, but it just looked anonymous. And I think that that's not what you're looking for him from him, especially because he's now one of those guys in a position where he's fighting for minutes. And he's fighting for minutes against guys that are 19 years old, right?
Well, and
And it's
to,
yeah,
yeah, to be candid, Tim, at some point I turned to Matt next to me and I said, why didn't Sam Williams start? I would have loved to see Sam Williams, and I love Kellen Acosta, but you're asking me for a guy who's making 17 times what Sam Williams is making, taking up a Max Tam spot. You need to see
yeah,
more
not
against a lower
quite
level
that much,
side.
but yeah, it's still like 14 something times. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
I
lot of
thought
money.
yeah.
Yeah, and this is again a performance. This is the kind of game that you would have expected maybe like a Sam Williams. If the plan at the beginning of the season had gone into effect, Sam Williams would be playing with Fire T. You would have thought maybe this would have been his first opportunity to get a short term call up with the first team, and then possibly I believe he could still play on Saturday. I think that's when they did the call up right before kickoff. Um, but it's a situation that it's in, and it's disappointing. Again, I don't want to over index this, and it's not terrible. I thought Sam Rogers, if we're talking about a guy named Sam, had a pretty decent game at center back, and I thought maybe this showed that he's getting his feet under him a little bit, and just that half step up between the speed of things that he had to deal with in against the USL Championship side versus an MLS side is enough to make the difference from him. Um, but it was I think kind of a bounce back performance from Rogers after. I mean, again, not trying to like rat like you know, but he was benched in favor of a 16-year-old, and that can't feel great as a professional with like 5-6 years of pro soccer under his belt. And I thought this was a good performance from him, and it probably gives him some confidence that when he's called in again, because he will be, that he can perform.
I do think there's an aspect to that. I agree. I thought he looked fine, right? He looked what I would hope Sam Rogers would look like, which is a competent third center back, right? Which I think is what we all kind of expected him to be. Um, I think at this point, the big difference is, if I'm being honest, like I think until Carlos Terran is back, he and Christopher Cups are going to be fighting for minutes, and it's probably going to be a lot of 60-30, 30-60 kind of situation, right? Of one guy starts, one guy relieves, one guy starts, one guy relieves, just because I doubt Christopher Cups has the endurance right now, just to be candid, right? Even he's 16 years old, he's never played a full pro season. Like he's going to need to kind of
Recover.
manage
Yeah.
himself.
Yep.
So Sam Rogers is going to be needed. Like I don't expect Carlos Duran to be available for most of the season at this point, just because of who he is as a player.
Yeah, agreed. I thought Guame had a pretty good performance as well. It's the first time that we've seen him
Absolutely.
go 90 in a Fire uniform. Um, and actually, first time since that match against the Red Bulls that we've seen him go more than a handful of minutes. Not dominant. He didn't do any. I mean, he did a couple of things that you're like, okay, this guy can play. But I mean, it's not like I think he was impressive the way that he, say like Marin was or Omari was. But again, he wasn't called on to be, and that's fine for this kind of a match, right? Like
Yeah.
this
And
game was
you've made the point to not like make a big deal out of this game, and we shouldn't, right? But we're talking about the things that we've been talking about in larger trends taken in this snippet, right? So what did we need? We needed a slump buster. We got a slump buster. What did we want to see? Omari compete physically against physical competition, and he did. We wanted to see Kellen Acosta break out of this slump against in a game where he could have, and he did have, I think, a shot or two on target that could have converted, but he didn't break out. Right? We didn't see vintage Kellen Acosta. He's not even taking set pieces, right? Which was kind of a calling card of his for years. Um, and we saw Sam Rogers play competently. So it's kind of this through line of the season that we're seeing in a microcosm of a game that you'd hope for more. When it comes to Kawame, the deeper we get into the season, the more I think he's probably not a long term option here. Not for anything of his own fault, right? I think he's a fine player, but candidly, he's not better than Sergio Orhel. He's not better than Brian Gutierrez. I don't know that he's even. I mean, I think he's better than Mari Pineda, but is he? I haven't seen that yet, right? And now, if Kevin De Bruyne comes in, he's certainly not better than Kevin De Bruyne, and I don't mean to jump the gun there. I think it's worth saying.
right. It's certainly a position again now, especially what you talked about earlier with like if Zingernagle plays the way that he's been playing, and if Marin starts playing the way that we've seen him play in the past and we saw tonight, then it lessens the need for there to be another DP winger to play opposite Bamba in the attack, and then that means you got to put one somewhere. Like you're not gonna not gonna get a center back, but except
Cameron
unless
Carter Vickers.
yeah, it's going to be Cameron Carter Vickers and Omar Gonzalez is going to sit next to him. It's like, hey, so just to let you know, I trailblazed this path for you as the first DP center back in this league. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to like get me a thank you present, but I do have a wish list on Amazon that I can send you a link to just if you
He
felt the
pulls
need.
he pulls out his phone and it has like the tip options.
How much of your designated player contract? Like
Yeah, how much would you like to tip?
fifteen
Man,
percent,
dude
25,
is
or
working
45.
at a bread shop and asking for tips. That's a pretty
Uh,
sad MLS retirement plan.
yeah.
But yeah, I
Incredible.
think that there's enough here to feel good about. Again, it was just it needed to be a win, and it was a win. That's refreshing to see. Atlanta um, on Saturday is a winnable game. We're going to preview that one, I think,
Yep.
coming on the feed soon. But I think that it should give everyone confidence going into that match.
Absolutely. I think the one place I'd personally like to leave it, um, I think tonight it's incredibly important to point out the fact that Hugo Kuipers and Jack Elliott played 60 minutes, roughly, right? It might have been a little less than that, might have been a little more, but they played roughly 50, 60 minutes. That's not nothing, right? I think, we talked at the beginning of this season about how this is a transition year for the club. Goal is to obviously compete, make the playoffs, and once you're in, who knows what happens. But I think I said early, the goal of this team, I think, is to make noise in the Open Cup because you want to deliver a trophy as soon as possible, and that's going to be the place to do it. I think Greg showed you tonight we are not taking this lightly. We are going to roll out what is a reasonable best 11 for us, and we are going to try and win every single game, potentially at the expense of league games,
You know,
which,
although we've talked to Greg about this several times, both like on things that have been recorded in press conferences and just conversations outside of that. And he's basically said, like, I made the case, right, that you often hear, and this is just one of those things where we're just chatting, and he's like, I'm just saying something that I'm almost repeating without critically examining, and he called me out on a little bit. I was like, look, because he's like, Manchester City, like they will play 2 games a week for three like 30 weeks out of the year, and it's not a big thing. I said, sure, but they've got a much bigger roster. And he's like, yeah, but like you look at who's playing, and it's like 8 or 9 of the same 11 every single time.
yeah,
And like that's fair, right? And like so his thing is basically with good fitness and good recovery, and the Fire now have the same facilities, at least if not the same same staff and training and all that experience with it, but same facilities as what a Premier League club would have to get that enhanced recovery quickly enough. And they're doing the same fitness routines that Premier League teams do. So his thinking is basically there's no excuses, and we hear the like rosters aren't big enough a lot, and I think reading between the lines, it's a common refrain that you hear because every team wants to have more players because that means more options. But doesn't he thinks that's more of an excuse for making an argument for expanding the roster rather than a necessity because of the number of matches that are getting played.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I don't disagree. I totally hear where you're coming from. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I would still maintain like there's been an importance placed on the Open Cup. I think rolling out your starting striker and your team captain, starting center back, who should be expected to play probably 70 minutes on Saturday, if not more, for 50 plus, says a lot. Because they could have played the first half, come off, and been totally fine. Tom Barlow and Omar Gonzalez could have managed 45 minutes. So I just think that points in the direction of we want to win this and we want to win it, this, now, right? Um, yeah, but I think in true this crew fashion, we said we were going to do 15 minutes, and we've done 25 already. Fellas, anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
Detroit sucks.
Very
Was that being
professional, Ryan.
chanted?
Very journalistic.
That was actually something in a point that was brought up on the broadcast where they said that I was hearing that getting chanted by the supporters section. What they said
Yes.
on the broadcast was that the fans were chanting, "We want the cup," and I'm like, that's not what I'm hearing.
We
That's a
did
very
They
not,
do.
that's a
I
very
don't
let's
doubt
go
that the
Brandon.
fans want the cup, but that's not what I'm hearing.
not say that at all. We very much said Detroit sucks. We also said F Detroit. We also did like the what do we think of Detroit? Wait, we did that.
So lots
Thank
of
you. That's all right.
journalistic neutrality coming from Alan right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I wasn't
okay,
going to bring
great.
it up.
This is why it's great to have people calling the games on location rather than from a dark room somewhere in Central Florida, or South Florida, South Central Florida, Central South Florida, which is what we had for this one. All right, lesson learned.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'd toss that in there, Tim. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, on this episode of Quickfire. Just keep an eye out today. This will go up Thursday, May 8th. You should expect a preview of Chicago Fire against Atlanta United the following day, that Friday. So a little later than normal, given the schedule with Open Cup this week. But you get a little bonus bonfire crew, so that's always good. As always, keep an eye on the website, menandred97.com. We got great reporting from Tim, from Alex, from Max. That'll keep you updated on all things Chicago Fire, all things US Open Cup, all that kind of fun stuff. And keep an eye on the socials. It's Men in Red 97 everywhere, including on Twitter. You can also do MIR97 pods to keep up there. And wherever you're listening to this, if you could subscribe, rate, like, share, all that kind of good stuff, boost us so that the algorithm can find us. Tell your friends to listen to the show, get them in the movement, get them in the section. That's kind of what this is all about. For Tim, for Alan, for our wonderful producer, Austin, who makes us sound good and does all the things, even though I'm the one putting this together tonight. We're still going to shout out Austin because he's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Quickfire as we burn our twigs in the middle of a dark, dark forest. We'll be back shortly with you to talk some Atlanta United Chicago Fire. But for now, let's enjoy the victory and come on, you men in red.